For the 2028 Democrat primary, there is one name that appears to emerge as a top contender for the 2028 presidential election, and his name is Pete Buttigieg. He's a former mayor and former Secretary of Transportation under Joe Biden, and Democrats believe that he will be a top contender in 2028. But the real question is, can Buttigieg actually win? Because in poll after poll, it shows that he is leading in many early Democrat primary surveys. There's no doubt about that. He is the clear choice if Kamala Harris is not in the 2028 primary. He's the clear choice as of August 2025. Yet his weakness, especially with minority voters, raises serious doubts about his chances, not only in the primary, but in a general election. And today we are going to be breaking down the 2028 presidential election with Pete Buttigieg, his strengths, weaknesses, and if he can actually win the presidency in 2028. So let's dive into it. Now, the 2028 presidential election is shaping up to be a battle of many new faces. The 2028 Democrat primary will not look like the Democrat primary of 2016 or 2020. There'll be different faces, different names that will appear. Some similar names like Pete Buttigieg, like Harris, like Cory Booker, but you could see new names like J.B. Pritzker, people like Gavin Newsom that could be jumping in this race, people like Andy Beshear. Meanwhile, on the Republican side, Republicans are very clearly rallying around a J.D. Vance, who is appearing to poll at roughly 50% in the aggregate poll from race to the White House, signaling that he has very strong support among the conservative and Republican Party. He's receiving 1 out of every 2 votes from a Republican as of right now. Democrats, however, are fractured. Their party is a complete disaster after the 2024 loss, with no dominant leader in a crowded field that will include people like Pete Buttigieg, people like Cory Booker, AOC, Gavin Newsom, Josh Shapiro, Tim Walz, Gretchen Whitmer, many, many names that could be in here. But the biggest issue that Americans have with Democrats are the economy, rise in prices. These Democrats will forever be tied to rise in prices. There's no getting away from that. The damage that the Biden administration did to our economy from 2021 to 2025, and we know in a general election that will likely dominate voters' priorities. Now, who the Democrats pick and who they favor in the primary will play big into who actually wins the 2028 presidential election, who can offer the most practical solutions. And for Democrats, that's kind of hard to do. Democrats are really, really bad at offering practical solutions. And the Republican Party should see this as an opportunity to capitalize on the disarray inside the Democrat Party, especially if the Republican Party continues to push a strong America First agenda. But when it comes to Pete Buttigieg, from a recent Emerson College poll from June, shows that he was leading the Democrat primary field with 16% support, ahead of Kamala Harris at 13%. And let's see, and Gavin Newsom at 12% here. AOC came in at 7%, and roughly 18% were saying they would vote for someone else, and 23% were undecided in this race. And it shows it's very clear. Polls suggest that Buttigieg has the momentum among Democrats if they're not Kamala Harris. He has the momentum, but he faces an extremely uphill battle in a general election. He just does. First, you start off with the fact that how polarized the environment is. And just the Democrat base, how polarized the voting base in the Democrat Party is. And early polling clearly favors Republicans out right now. Bet-in odds clearly favor Republicans 3 years out, who benefit from Democrat infighting and a stronger economic message from the Republican Party. Now, Pete Buttigieg does have some strengths going into 2028. Clearly, he shines in the media. He is very good at breaking down complex issues on platforms, goes on Fox News, goes on podcasts that are not friendly to him, which I really think broadens his appeals with moderates, independents, and even some Republicans. And I think his Indiana roots and really give him a credibility. He comes from a swing state, a critical swing state, or a critical state that used to be a swing state. And in 2020, he had a lot of primary success. He won the Iowa caucuses and placed second in the New Hampshire primary, proving he can compete in the early states that are required to be the Democrat nominee. And at 46 years old in 2028, he will be able to connect with younger voters. He'll be much more culturally aligned with the voters that will be voting in 2028 in the Democrat primary. He's been able to connect with people on platforms like X, like Substack, being able to meet voters where they're at, taking a much different approach than Kamala Harris did, where voters need to meet her where she's at, to he's going to meet voters where they're at. And I think that is a big, it's an asset for Pete Buttigieg. And I think at the end of the day, Pete Buttigieg he's a progressive. He is. And yes, is he trying to, thread this needle that he is now some sort of this moderate? Yeah, he is. He is. Clearly, even most recently, kind of taking up the same talking points that Governor Gavin Newsom has talked about with transgenders in women's sports. It's a fairness issue that we're talking about here. It is not about anything else. He's trying to really play it as a fairness issue. And I think that affects them a lot. And I think this is an issue that Americans by and far disagree with the Democrat Party and how they've took a stance on it. And Buttigieg sees that and he's changing. I don't think he's changing because he actually cares about the position changing. He's changing because he wants to win. They are still just as radical as they were before. Let's all be honest about this. They are just as radical as they were before. But he's going to try and paint himself as this moderate that can attract swing voters. But honestly, I do not believe it will be enough to overcome the deeper flaws within Buttigieg. And of course, the biggest liability for Pete Buttigieg is his lack of minority support. In that same poll from June of 2025 that showed that Pete Buttigieg was leading with 16% from the Emerson College was the same poll that showed that Pete Buttigieg had 0% support from African American voters in that poll, which is a critical base of the Democrat Party. That is something that will cripple his nomination chances if that materializes in 2028. Add on the fact that he has a lack of limited executive experience. Look, he was a mayor from a small city. He was a transportation secretary where he probably was one of the worst transportation secretaries we've ever had. Remember, this is the guy who was going out talking about how 80 years ago, all the racist white people were building bridges that were too low so that buses carrying predominantly African American or minorities would not be able to go down a road. Like, this guy is so far down the rabbit hole. He is a left-wing radical Democrat. I shouldn't even call him a Democrat. He's a leftist. He's a left-wing radical leftist. There's no doubt about that. And I think there's a lot of Democrats that also are worrying about his identity as an openly gay candidate, which could alienate some swing voters. You could alienate, you're already having issues with African Americans. That's going to really, where is that going to hurt you? That is going to predominantly hurt you in places like Pennsylvania, places like North Carolina, like Georgia, the Deep South. This is where it's going to hurt you the most right here. Could it hurt you in the big cities? In New York, Illinois, California, absolutely. But in the swing states, that is really where it's going to hurt you. Then you add on he's a homosexual, and there's a lot of Democrats, black Democrats, who are culturally conservative, who are not okay with that. That's not something they're going to vote for. Not saying that's right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm just saying there are a lot of culturally conservative Democrats in the South. Because he has such little support among the African American and minority communities, maybe support among the African Americans drops 10%. Then you add on the fact that he's gay, and could that hurt him even more with the Democrat Party's base of African Americans in the Deep South? Could that hurt him even more? Maybe African American turnout drops 15 or 20% in the key swing states, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, where you have millions of African Americans that reside here. Like we said, he has struggled from the day he was a mayor to his time as transportation secretary to being a 2020 Democrat running for the nomination. He has struggled at every single step. In his progressive policies, like supporting public health insurance options, mandated public health insurance, clash with voters who prioritize fiscal responsibility and traditional values. But then you have to take a step back. That we are talking about the actual general election, but can he actually win the Democrat nomination? Now, early polling has him anywhere between 16 to 27% in these polls, which I think that shows he's a serious contender, especially if Kamala Harris skips the race and doesn't run, which I think I'd be surprised by because she announced that she's not going to run in the gubernatorial election. But if she doesn't run, I think he's clearly the front runner as of right now. Look, he has a media savvy appearance. He tries to present himself as a moderate with his messaging more recently, which I think could unify centrist and younger voters, but he definitely needs to broaden his appeal if he wants to actually compete in the 2028 general election. Or even, I think he's going to have to go to the left in the primary and come back to the center for the general election. Could he run into the same issues that, let's say, Kamala Harris had to deal with? Simply the fact that she held all of these policies and these policies for decades, and then all of a sudden she runs for president and they all change. I think that Buttigieg would run into a similar issue in the 2028 election if he became the nominee or even just running. So we'll see. We know 2020, he had Iowa and New Hampshire that he almost won in one of them and won the other. He has a clear track record where he can have an edge in these early states, these more predominantly white states, but he must overcome the skepticism about his experience, about his policies, and about his lack of support among African Americans. And Buttigieg might win the nominations if Democrats prioritize electability, but I think his minority support gap is going to be an extremely risky bet going into 2028, and I think it will extremely hurt him in the 2028 the general election. But to wrap things up and to conclude things, Pete Buttigieg is a rising star with strong communication skills and Midwest roots, but his weakness outweighs his strengths for 2028. Polling shows he could secure the Democrat nomination if he overcomes this support with minorities, or this gap of support, lack of support among minorities. But that's a big if. Because in a general election, his lack of minority support, especially among black voters, will make victory nearly impossible against a strong Republican, considering what the swing states are in 2028. In the 2028 election, in my opinion, favors the Republican Party if Democrats nominate a candidate like Buttigieg, who can't unify their base or win over swing voters and who has big liabilities. But what do you think? Do you think Buttigieg can overcome these weaknesses, or is the GOP poised to dominate the 2028 elections once again? Folks, that is going to wrap things up for today. As always, drop down below, hit that subscribe button, make sure you never miss another video from us again in the future, and folks, we will catch you next time.